Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Clara Evans moved into her new apartment in downtown Manhattan on a chilly October afternoon. The air smelled faintly of rain and freshly painted walls. After years of living with other people's noise, the silence felt like freedom. She had left a long relationship that had become more routine than love, and this small corner of the city was her clean slate. She wanted nothing complicated, just peace, work, and maybe a little sleep. Her neighbor arrived the same evening. The building's automatic lights flickered on as she carried the last of her boxes through the hall, and that was when she saw him, Adrian Hale. The name sounded familiar, but it did not click until later. He nodded once, polite but distant, holding a phone and a key card in one hand. His expression was unreadable, like someone calculating something invisible. For the first few days, Clara barely saw him. She heard the soft sound of piano through the shared wall, the kind of music that carries late at night when the city goes quiet. Sometimes she caught a faint scent of espresso and cedar when she passed his door. She told herself not to be curious, but curiosity was part of her nature. One night, a faint knock startled her. When she opened the door, Adrian stood there, holding a small towel. Water had leaked through the ceiling into his apartment, and he thought it might be coming from hers. Clara invited him in to check, embarrassed that the ceiling vent was indeed dripping. Together they placed a bowl under the leak, and for the first time, he smiled briefly, like a man unused to it. He thanked her and apologized for the disturbance. His voice was low and careful, the kind of tone that belongs to someone who chooses every word. He offered to pay for the repair, but she refused. It was not about money. Something about his presence stayed with her long after he left, like a question without an answer. The next morning, she searched his name online. The results were immediate. Adrian Hale, founder and CEO of Hale Dynamics, a private technology company known for encryption software and defense contracts. Billionaire, reclusive, 32 years old. Articles called him a genius, a ghost in plain sight. The man next door was not just another neighbor. Their paths crossed again in the elevator. He noticed the blueprint tubes in her hand and asked what she did for a living. When she mentioned interior design, his attention sharpened. He said he had been meaning to redesign his study, but had not found the right person. Before the doors opened, he handed her his card. That night, Clara looked at the card for a long time before sending a simple message. I can help if you still need someone. The reply came minutes later. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. As she prepared her portfolio, she caught herself wondering why her pulse quickened. It was not just admiration. There was something magnetic about the way he held himself, calm, precise, contained. She did not know yet that every rule he lived by had a reason, and that behind the quiet music and the elegant walls, something far more fragile was waiting to be uncovered. That night, as the rain returned, Clara heard the piano again through the wall. It played the same melody, over and over, until she fell asleep, not knowing whether it was a love song or a warning. The next morning, Clara Evans stood outside Adrian Hale's door with a leather folder pressed against her chest. The hallway was quiet, and her reflection glimmered faintly on the polished metal of his door. When it opened, the soft scent of espresso and sandalwood drifted into the corridor. Inside, the apartment was a portrait of control, bright, minimal, and precisely arranged. Every object seemed chosen for function rather than comfort. Adrian gestured toward the study. "This is the space I want to change," he said. His voice was calm but distant, the kind that carried weight even in short sentences. The room itself felt different from the rest. 3 computer monitors glowed with shifting code. Files lay in perfect order. The piano in the corner, though elegant, appeared untouched for years. Clara could feel how silence lived here, heavy but disciplined. "What do you want it to feel like?" she asked. He thought for a long time before answering. "Quiet. Something that helps me think without remembering too much." The phrasing caught her, but she did not ask what he meant. Instead, she spoke about tone, texture, and balanced soft walls. Natural light, muted tones. He listened with focus that bordered on intensity, nodding occasionally as though each word was a calculation. Over the following week, Clara returned several times to take measurements and review samples. Adrian always waited at the door exactly on time, offering coffee and brief conversation. He never asked personal questions but remembered every detail she shared. When she mentioned her small design studio, he said he admired independence. When she laughed about her terrible sense of direction, he told her he respected people who could get lost and still arrive. Late one evening, the city thundered with rain as they worked. Lightning painted the windows white. The power flickered once. Adrian poured them both a glass of wine while the storm rolled closer. "You do not seem bothered by storms," he said. "They remind me that control is temporary," she replied. He watched her for a moment longer than polite. "That is why I avoid them," he said quietly. The lights steadied, but something in the air stayed charged. Their talk moved away from the study, towards sleeplessness, pressure, the loneliness of success. Adrian spoke without ego, almost clinically, about how brilliance could trap a person inside their own design. Clara found herself listening not as a designer but as someone who saw the cost of silence. When she finally stood to leave, he walked her to the door. "You listen differently," he said. "Most people wait to respond. You wait to understand." That comment stayed with her through the night. The next few days passed with an ease that should have been impossible between near strangers. She arrived early one morning to find him at the piano, playing a melody both restless and beautiful. He stopped when he saw her. "I did not mean to interrupt," she said. "You did not," he replied. "It was unfinished anyway." She smiled. "Maybe it just needs someone else to hear it." He said nothing, but the look he gave her was unguarded, almost human in its warmth. For the first time, his composure slipped, and she realized that the precision he lived by was not arrogance, it was armor. That night, as she walked home through the wet streets, the melody followed her like a memory she could not place. She wondered what kind of pain could make a man so careful, and whether loving him would mean learning where that pain began. By the time she reached her apartment, she already knew the answer. She wanted to find out. The following week settled into a rhythm that felt almost domestic. Clara Evans arrived each morning with her sketchbook, and Adrian Hale opened the door precisely at the same minute every day. Their routine became unspoken coffee first, quiet review of plans, then discussion about textures and tone. Yet beneath that surface of professionalism, something unacknowledged kept shifting between them. One evening, as the city faded into the blue light of dusk, Adrian paused at the edge of the study while Clara arranged fabric samples across the desk. "There is one condition before we continue," he said. His tone was even, but his expression carried something heavier than business. "You may continue to work here, but there are rules. 3 of them." Clara looked up, uncertain whether he was serious. "Rules?" "Yes," he said. "First, do not ask about my past. Second, do not enter the last room at the end of the hallway. Third, do not leave the building after 11 without sending a message to let me know that you are safe." The words hung in the air like a contract written in silence. They were not spoken with control or threat, but with the quiet insistence of someone who believed order could prevent disaster. Clara hesitated, then asked, "Are these rules about privacy or protection?" He met her eyes. "Both." Something in his voice made her stop questioning. She nodded. "All right, I can respect that." The rest of the evening continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet when she left, the echo of his words followed her down the hallway. She noticed, for the first time, that the door at the end was sealed with a digital lock, its small red light blinking like a heartbeat in the dark. In the nights that followed, Clara began hearing faint sounds through the wall-muffled music, a voice, perhaps a recording. Each time she tried to focus, the sound disappeared. She convinced herself it was her imagination or the city's restless noise, but deep down, curiosity had already taken root. During the next session, she caught Adrian staring into the locked hallway for several seconds before turning back to her. When she asked if everything was all right, he smiled without warmth. "I am simply thinking," he said. "The mind has corners we do not always want to visit." His restraint fascinated her as much as it confused her. The more she learned about him, the less she understood. He spoke of trust as though it were a mathematical equation, precise and conditional. And yet, whenever their hands brushed over a sample book or a drawing, the tension between them felt unmistakably human. One night, she worked later than usual. The building grew quiet except for the soft hum of the air system. As she packed her tools, she heard the sound again, something like a cry, faint but sharp. She froze. Adrian was in the living room, motionless, staring at the wall as though he heard it too. When he noticed her watching, his composure returned instantly. "It is nothing," he said, "an old vent. The building carries sound strangely at night." Clara wanted to believe him, but her body did not. The air felt heavier, and for the first time she sensed that the silence between them was not peace but protection. Still, she stayed. The connection between them was too complex to abandon. Every time she tried to pull back, he would do something unexpectedly gentle: remember her favorite tea, leave a note thanking her for the new layout, or simply listen when she spoke about design as a kind of therapy. When she went home that evening, the melody from his piano drifted through the wall again, softer than before. She stood in her own apartment, hand on the plaster, feeling each note like a pulse beneath her palm. The rules he gave her were simple. But even simple rules have consequences when love begins to test their meaning. Clara did not know it yet, but crossing one of those invisible lines would soon reveal a truth she was never meant to see. Days passed, and the lines between work and intimacy began to blur in ways Clara Evans had not anticipated. What had started as a design project was now something far more personal. She still respected Adrian Hale's 3 rules, but each one began to feel like a question pressing quietly against her thoughts. Adrian remained precise and distant during the day, yet his calm carried small fractures she could sense but not name. He sometimes stopped mid-sentence, as if distracted by something only he could hear. When that happened, his eyes would lose focus for a heartbeat, then return sharp and clear again, as though he had forced himself back into the present. Clara told herself not to read too much into it. People under pressure developed habits, and Adrian carried the weight of an empire. Still, her instincts whispered that what she saw was not stress, it was something deeper. One afternoon, while reviewing the layout for acoustic panels, Clara noticed a folder open on his screen. The name was a string of letters and numbers, sterile and clinical. A single document preview flashed briefly before he minimized it. The glimpse was short, but she caught words like session, stabilization, and monitoring. She said nothing, pretending she had not noticed. Adrian continued talking about lighting angles as if unaware of her reaction. But when she looked at him again, she thought she saw recognition in his eyes, a flicker that said he knew she had seen too much. That evening when she returned home, her mind replayed every detail. She wondered what kind of business file used medical terminology. Her curiosity fought with the promise she had made not to ask about his past. Later that night, she sat in her dark apartment, listening to the soft hum of the piano through the wall. The melody was no longer gentle. It was fragmented, like a thought breaking apart. The next morning, Adrian appeared at her door instead of waiting inside his own. He handed her a cup of coffee and said, "I appreciate your patience. Yesterday was not my best day." She accepted the cup, watching him closely. "Everyone has off days," she said. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I hope you never see mine." The words were simple, but the tone behind them was not. Over the following week, small details began to shift. The locks on his doors were replaced with newer digital models. His assistant, who had occasionally visited, stopped appearing altogether. Clara found the new silence unsettling. A neighbor mentioned that Adrian's unit had once been involved in an incident. The story was vague, something about emergency lights one night and security arriving without sirens. The neighbor said the apartment had been empty for months afterward before Adrian returned. Clara laughed politely, pretending she did not care. But she could not unhear the detail about the incident. That night, she worked later than usual again. Around 10, she walked to the kitchen to rinse her brushes. Through the thin reflection of the glass, she saw Adrian standing in the hallway of his apartment, staring at the locked door at the far end. His expression was unreadable, his body still. She almost called out, but the sight of him frozen like that, so focused, so detached, kept her silent. When she turned off her kitchen light, she saw him move at last. He placed his hand on the keypad of the locked door, then lowered it slowly, almost tenderly, before walking away. Clara leaned against her counter, her pulse quickening. She had promised not to break his rules, but questions pressed harder now. What was behind that door? Why did he live like a man guarding his own shadow? The next morning, she arrived to find him sitting at the piano. He looked exhausted, his fingers hovering over the keys without playing. "Do you ever feel," he asked quietly, "that memory is not something you keep, but something that keeps you?" Clara did not answer right away. She simply sat beside him. "Only when I try too hard to forget," she said at last. He turned toward her, his eyes searching. "Then you understand more than you think." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was the kind of silence that carried the weight of everything unspoken. That night, Clara could not sleep. The rules no longer felt like boundaries. They felt like alarms, and each one was beginning to sound. The following week arrived with a strange stillness that seemed to settle over everything. Adrian Hale's apartment, once filled with quiet piano and deliberate conversation, now felt heavy, as if the air itself had learned to listen. Clara Evans tried to focus on her work, but she could not escape the sense that something invisible had shifted between them. Adrian had become more careful and more distant. He still greeted her each morning with a polite nod and a cup of coffee, but his words were shorter, measured, and cautious. When she spoke, he listened without expression, and sometimes his gaze drifted toward the hallway, the one that ended at the locked door. One afternoon, as Clara reviewed blueprints, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text contained a single line, asterisk, "You should know who he really is." Asterisk attached was a file labeled asterisk asterisk, patient 07, Adrian Hale, asterisk asterisk. Her heart raced as she opened it. The document was clinical, written in the precise language of medical professionals. It referenced episodes of psychosis, violent behavior during a dissociative state, and a court-mandated psychiatric evaluation from 5 years earlier. At the bottom, a note indicated asterisk voluntary treatment completed, condition stable under supervision. Asterisk. Clara stared at the screen until her vision blurred. She wanted to believe it was fake, some twisted joke or a scam. But the more she read, the more real it felt. There was even a signature from a hospital administrator and a partial address that matched one of New York's private psychiatric facilities. She closed the file and locked her phone, her mind racing through memories, Adrian's hesitation to discuss his past, the locked door, the faint cries at night, and the way he sometimes seemed to drift away from the present. All the small fragments she had ignored now formed a pattern she could not unsee. That night, she did not go to his apartment. Instead, she sat by her own window, watching the rain blur the city lights. The file replayed in her mind like a whisper she could not silence. She considered calling the hospital, or the police, or anyone who could confirm whether the file was real. But something inside her refused to act on fear. The next morning, Adrian knocked on her door before she could gather her courage to face him. "You were not here last night," he said, his tone casual but his eyes tense. "I needed rest," she replied. He nodded slowly. "Good. You work too hard." They both knew it was a lie. Throughout the day, Clara's thoughts twisted between doubt and trust. If the file was genuine, what did it mean? Had he hurt someone? Was he still dangerous? And if it was false, then who would go to such lengths to destroy his name? By late afternoon, her confusion turned to resolve. She printed the document, folded it neatly, and placed it in her bag. When Adrian returned from a call, she stood waiting near the piano. "I need to ask you something," she said. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. He looked at her, cautious. "What is it?" She handed him the printed file. "This was sent to me." Adrian froze. His eyes scanned the page, and the color drained from his face. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, very quietly, he asked, "Who gave this to you?" "I do not know," she said. "But I need to understand if it is true." He laughed softly. But it was not amusement, it was disbelief mixed with exhaustion. "People see what they want to see," he said. "That file is not the truth. It is a version of it, twisted and incomplete." "Then help me see the real one," Clara said. Adrian stepped closer. His eyes glistened, but his voice steadied. "You should leave it alone. Curiosity does not heal anyone." She did not answer. She could feel that he was hiding something, but she also saw fear, raw, human fear in his expression. When she returned home, she left the lights off and sat in the dark. The glow of her phone reflected faintly on her hand. The sender's number had vanished. The file could no longer be opened. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. Somewhere through the wall, Adrian began playing the piano again. This time, the melody was neither gentle nor sad. It sounded like a man trying to remember who he used to be. Clara listened until the music stopped, and when silence returned, she realized the real question was no longer times who he was asterisk, but times who wanted her to find out asterisk. That night, Clara Evans could not sleep. The storm outside pressed against her windows, and every flash of lightning lit the edges of her thoughts. On the table beside her lay the printed document, asterisk asterisk, patient 07, Adrian Hale, asterisk asterisk, now smudged with the faint trace of her fingerprints. No matter how she turned it over in her mind, one truth remained clear. She needed to confront him. By morning, her decision hardened into action. She walked the short distance to his apartment, her heartbeat steady but her breath uneven. When the door opened, Adrian looked as though he had not slept either. His shirt was wrinkled, and the usual precision of his demeanor had softened into something uncertain. "I think we should talk," she said. He stepped aside without protest. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the air system. Clara placed the document on the table between them. "Tell me the truth," she said. "What is this?" Adrian stared at the file, then at her. For a long moment, he said nothing. His face was calm, but his hands trembled slightly at his sides. "Who sent this to you?" he asked. "I do not know, but I think you do," Clara said. Something flickered in his eyes, fear, anger, or both. "It is not real," he said finally. "It is an old draft of something that should have been destroyed." "Then why was it sent to me?" He turned away. "Because someone wants you to believe it." "Then help me not believe it," she said quietly. Adrian pressed his palms against the table and drew in a long breath. 5 years ago, I checked myself into a private facility after a breakdown. My company was collapsing, and I was not sleeping. They treated me for exhaustion and trauma. Someone later exaggerated that story into a diagnosis that sells headlines. "Then there was no violence, no missing person?" she asked. He looked at her sharply. "You read that part." She nodded. "There was someone," he admitted. "But not in the way you think." Before he could explain, the lights flickered. A low pop echoed from the far end of the apartment. Clara turned toward the sound, the locked hallway. The smell of burning plastic filled the air. "Stay here," Adrian said, moving quickly. She followed anyway, ignoring his command. Sparks burst from a wall outlet near the study door. Smoke curled upward, and a small flame licked across a cable. Adrian grabbed a fire extinguisher from the kitchen, shouting for her to get back. He sprayed until the air filled with mist and the fire died. The power cut out completely, leaving them in darkness lit only by the orange glow from the street below. Clara coughed, waving away the smoke. Adrian set down the extinguisher and turned to her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "No." "Are you?" He laughed once, low and shaken. "It seems I am always putting out fires I did not start." The tension between them broke in that moment. The fear, the questions, the sleepless nights, all of it poured out in silence as their eyes met. Clara stepped closer, not out of pity but understanding. Adrian looked exhausted, stripped of every layer of control he had built around himself. "Who is doing this to you?" she asked. "I do not know," he said. "But it is someone who understands my past better than I do." When the power returned, the apartment lights blinked on again. The place looked ordinary. No sign of chaos except for the thin layer of white foam from the extinguisher. Yet something fundamental had changed. Adrian leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. "You should go home for tonight. It is not safe here." "I am not leaving you alone," she said. He looked at her, eyes weary but soft. "Clara, I have lived alone for years. It is safer that way." She shook her head. "Not tonight." For the first time, he did not argue. They sat in silence until dawn, the piano untouched, the file lying forgotten on the table. When sunlight finally broke through the smoke-streaked windows, Clara realized she no longer knew whether she trusted him or whether she was starting to fear what the truth would reveal. Outside, sirens echoed faintly across the city. Somewhere within those sounds was a promise that what had started as curiosity was now becoming something much more dangerous. By the next morning, the world outside Adrian Hale's apartment no longer felt the same. Clara Evans awoke to the sound of her phone vibrating endlessly. The screen was filled with notifications, news headlines, messages, and unanswered calls. Every major outlet carried the same story. ***. Tech billionaire, Adrian Hale, identified as former psychiatric patient. ***. Her pulse quickened as she scrolled through the articles. The leaked document she had seen was now everywhere. Reporters quoted anonymous hospital staff. Financial blogs speculated about his mental state and company stability. Photos of his apartment building appeared on nearly every screen. Clara turned on the television. A live broadcast showed journalists standing outside the building entrance, microphones ready. Words like "times unstable asterisk," dangerous asterisk, and "times unfit" to lead times flashed across the lower third of the screen. Her doorbell rang sharply. When she opened it, Adrian stood there wearing a dark coat and a look that carried equal parts anger and disbelief. "They have it," he said quietly. "The file. The full version." Clara could barely find her voice. "Adrian, I did not." He raised a hand. "I know you did not, but someone wants them to think you did." He handed her a printed news article. The subheading read, "Source of the leak believed to be close to Hale, identified as interior designer Clara Evans. Her stomach dropped. "They are naming me?" "Yes," he said. Someone fed them just enough information to make it believable. Outside, camera flashes lit the windows like bursts of lightning. Adrian looked toward the hallway. "Pack a small bag," he said. "You cannot stay here. They will find your address before the day ends." Clara hesitated. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere quiet," he said. "Somewhere no one is looking." But by that afternoon it was already too late. News vans filled the street, and social media swarmed with speculation. His company's board released a statement announcing that Adrian had stepped back temporarily for personal reasons. Investors began to pull funding. Stock prices fell within hours. Clara tried to reach him again, but his number stopped working. She called his assistant, who said only, "Mr. Hale is safe but unreachable." By nightfall, Adrian had vanished. Reporters began camping outside Clara's building, shouting questions as she walked to her car. She refused to answer, clutching her bag as if silence could protect her. Inside, she reread every message, every clue, every memory of the man who had asked her not to cross the line, and realized that line had already been erased. When she returned home, a small envelope lay under her door. Inside was a single note written in Adrian's handwriting. Asterisk. Do not believe everything you see. The truth has two sides, and the one you hold is not the final one. Trust what you felt, not what they show. Asterisk. There was no address, no signature, no contact number, only the faint scent of smoke, as if the paper had been near a fire. Clara sat on the floor, the world outside echoing with judgment and noise. She had wanted answers, and now she had them, but none made sense without the man who had become both mystery and confession. Somewhere in the city, Adrian Hale was no longer a billionaire, no longer a patient, and no longer within her reach. Days turned into weeks, and the story refused to fade. Clara Evans stopped watching the news, but she could not avoid it. Every calf, every radio, every social media feed repeated Adrian Hale's name. The public called him a fraud, a danger, a man who had built an empire on deception. His face was everywhere, except where she needed it most. Clara spent her time searching for anything that could explain how the file had reached the media. She spoke with former employees of Hale Dynamics, old journalists, and even hospital staff who refused to confirm or deny his record. Every trail ended in silence or fear. People avoided his name as if it were cursed. One night, while reviewing the digital copy of the leaked file, Clara noticed a small inconsistency. The document metadata listed two different creation dates. One line of data matched 5 years ago, the time of Adrian's supposed treatment. The other was just 6 weeks old. That meant someone had edited the file recently, blending new information with old records. Following the timestamp, she traced the upload location to a private clinic on the outskirts of the city. The name was familiar. It was the same hospital mentioned in the file, Street Alara Psychiatric Institute. The next morning, Clara drove there. The facility sat on a hill surrounded by quiet pine trees. Its windows reflected the gray sky like mirrors. At the reception, she introduced herself as a journalist researching data security breaches. The staff hesitated, then directed her to a doctor named Evelyn Shaw, an administrator who had worked there for years. When Clara mentioned the name Adrian Hale, the doctor's expression shifted. "You should not be asking about him," Dr. Shaw said softly. "That file was never meant to exist." Clara leaned forward. "Then why does it?" The doctor sighed. "Because there were 2 patients. The records were merged to protect one of them." Clara's pulse quickened. 2 patients? Dr. Shaw nodded. Adrian Hale was treated here voluntarily. But there was another, his twin sister, Amelia Hale. She suffered from severe trauma and a dissociative disorder. The public never knew about her. Adrian paid for her care and agreed to take responsibility for her actions after an incident years ago. He became her legal guardian. When the leak occurred, someone manipulated the files to make him look unstable instead of her. The revelation struck Clara like a cold wave. The missing spouse mentioned in the file was not a lover or a wife. It was his sister. The truth had been twisted to protect her privacy, but the manipulation turned Adrian into the villain instead. "Where is he now?" Clara asked. Dr. Shaw hesitated, then whispered, "He returned here. Voluntarily. He is helping us rebuild the treatment plan for his sister." Clara sat back in disbelief. All this time, Adrian had not disappeared to hide. He had come back to fix the damage someone else caused. When she left the clinic, the air felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time, the story made sense. The locked room, the fear, the silence, the fire, it had all been protection, not deception. As she drove back into the city, the evening light reflected off the wet streets. The world still believed Adrian Hale was lost, but Clara now knew where to find him. Clara Evans returned to the Street Alara Psychiatric Institute on a clear morning that carried the chill of early winter. The drive had been long, and her hands trembled as she signed her name at the reception. The attendant recognized her immediately and nodded, as if expecting her arrival. "He is in the East Wing," the attendant said quietly. "Second floor, end of the corridor." As she walked down the hall, the faint scent of disinfectant mixed with something softer, lavender, perhaps, a scent chosen to calm nerves. The walls were white, the kind of white that tried to erase pain but never could. At the end of the corridor, a piano played softly. The melody was simple, steady, and unmistakably his. Adrian sat near the window, sunlight outlining the sharp edges of his face. He looked thinner but peaceful. When he noticed her, the music stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both apology and relief. "You found me," he said. "I had to," Clara replied. "They told me everything." He nodded once, his gaze lowering. "Then you know about Amelia?" "Yes," she said. "And I know you let the world believe lies to protect her." Adrian's hands rested on the piano keys, motionless. People believe what makes the world easier to understand. A billionaire with a mental illness is a headline. A sister with a fragile mind is a tragedy that no one wants to read. Clara took a step closer. "You could have told me." "I wanted to," he said softly. "But every time I looked at you, I saw someone who still believed in the best version of me. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, that version would disappear." She sat beside him, her voice calm. "The truth does not destroy what is real. It only reveals what survives it." For a long while, they sat in silence. Outside the window, the trees swayed gently in the wind. The calm felt fragile, but it was real. "I am working with the doctors again," Adrian said finally. "We are rebuilding Amelia's treatment plan. The company has offered to settle the investigation quietly. I will not return to it." "Some things are not meant to be rebuilt." Clara looked at him. "And you?" He turned to her, a shadow of a smile on his lips. "I am learning that healing is not a straight line. It is a loop that brings you back to the people who refuse to walk away." She reached out, placing her hand over his. "Then let it bring you back." The sunlight shifted across the floor, warm and golden. For the first time in months, there was no tension in his shoulders, no guarded expression behind his eyes. The music began again, this time with both their hands on the keys. When she left the institute later that afternoon, the melody followed her into the quiet. It was no longer a song of guilt or secrecy. It was something steady and new, a reminder that even in the wreckage of reputation and fear, two people could still find a place to begin again. The world would continue to argue about who Adrian Hale really was. But for Clara, the answer was simple. He was the man next door, the one who had taught her that love, like truth, does not vanish in fire. It only learns how to endure it.